Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the buy list for the Mega Evolution expansion for the competitive trading card game. Starting off with the core essentials, these are cards that are expected to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders, or have obvious future potential. So starting in the top left then, we have the trainer cards that I think are most important to pick up. And Lily's Determination is a miraculous supporter. It is so powerful, it's going to make its way into all sorts of current Stage 2 archetypes. It could also breathe life into some previously known lesser consistent decks and make them more viable. I'm thinking things like Ho-Oh Armarouge, I'm thinking like Slowking, I'm thinking all of these archetypes that are just teetering on consistency being their big Achilles heel. Lily's Determination genuinely gets them into games quite consistently, so I think this card is going to be a godsend for all of these sort of weaker or sort of more greedy strategies, as well as like some of the best decks that we know in the game. Lots of the stage 2s sit behind Budu to buy time. There's multiple turns in which Lily can be grabbing you 8 cards. There's secret box builds where even just one copy is going to be useful to pull out when you want it. Yeah, this card is just absolutely crazy, and it's going to be chopping into research counts and Arven counts and Iono counts and forcing its way into decks because 8 cards is just a silly amount to see in the early game. Then we have the Wally's Compassion support card, very useful as a healing option into Mega Evolution EXs, putting all those energy back into your hand as well. There are ways you can subvert that, either by having the likes of Venusaur's ability, Solar Trans, moving the energy off, then using Wally for no downside. Also, there's the likes of Mega Latias EX, which discards energy from itself, and you can still get that heal with no downside. So, yeah, this Wally supporter, very solid for the handful of megas that we do know about, but of course this gets stronger and stronger as more mega evolutions are printed, and as we know, the megas are 3 prize Pokemon that have ridiculous amounts of hit points. It's not difficult to even make the basics very chunky with the likes of Bravery Charm, suddenly making the Wally's Compassion a great healing option. There's the Acerora's Mischief supporter. By the virtue of how the card is worded, you probably only ever play 1 in your deck, and you're probably only ever trying to use this once during the game at a very specific point in the game when your opponent has 2 or fewer prize cards remaining. But it can be similar to a Briar style effect, a way to completely flip the game back in your favor from a position where your opponent is creeping towards game the following turn. You can make it so they can no longer target a specific thing that would win them the game and possibly foil all sorts of plans. So I think possibly Pidgeot engines, possibly Noctowl engines could take advantage of this supporter card to, again, sort of rug pull against opponents, similar to how we've seen Briar in the past. Mega Signal is entirely on here for its future potential. I haven't really weaved this into any of my decks just yet, but it is a very easy search for a Mega. And if ever we get a drawing Mega EX, like right now, Kangaskhan is technically a draw Pokemon, but not really, because it has to be in the active position. So I feel like if we get coming into play ability Mega Evolution Pokemon, this card just goes way up in value for some easy search. Right now, possibly it can weave into a Mega Kanga based Terra Box, just for a Noctowl option, so you don't have to discard to find the guy. But at the moment we have a lot of basic search already, so it's kind of okay. But this could easily weave into archetypes in the future, and that's why it's on here as an easy 4 count. Then we have the couple of stadium cards. There's Dangerous Ruins, which I think is a really interesting stadium. Whenever your opponent puts a basic down, except for dark types, you put 2 counters on that Pokemon. Now that could have synergy with Monkey Dory on your side of the field, actually. So you could be dropping down Monkey Dories when you have a Dangerous Ruins in play, and suddenly you can be flinging that damage straight back to your opponent. So I think the likes of Grimmsnarl, where it's used Frostlass, I think the likes of Dragapult that's used Hawlucha, Gardevoir that also uses Monkey Dory very heavily, there's very much an angle where Dangerous Ruins becomes certainly a secret box one of, but also could be a dominant stadium at points with some of these archetypes. And again, we know that Monkey Dory is just generically very strong, so I think there's ways to make Monkey faster is always has a lot of potential, so something that I'm definitely considering. Yveltal is a Dark-type free retreater with the Clutch attack, which I think makes it an upgrade immediately into Grimmsnarl over Maractus, although there are some situations where Maractus having its Exploding Needles ability is slightly superior. Again, because this Yveltal is just a free retreat pivot, if there are archetypes, again, naturally using Darkness Energy that wants that style of effect, like an Enzoroark archetype, for example, or an archetype that has enough Luminous Energy that they don't care that Maractus is a colorless attack cost, they could look towards this card as well if they value free retreat above that card. So definitely worth picking up one of those. We know that corner trapping has been really important as of late with all sorts of archetypes. Then we have the Gardevoir support and upgrades. First of all, you want to get the new Curliers, you want to get the new Rolts. These are all upgrades because the Call Sign attack is really useful on Curlier to get multiple Pokemon out in a pinch, and the Collect attack on the Rolts is better than just announcing Pass in some situations, especially when you want to sacrifice Psychic Energy regardless. So you may as well get the additional card when you can. And then 2 Mega Gardevoir EX. I think you're never going to need more than 2 because it is the nature of the card. When you're trying to get it into play, you're still going to rely on the regular EX quite often throughout the game, and this can feel like a really nice finishing card, or in matchups where they don't offer one-hit KO, this can be a big beater. So a very powerful option within those archetypes that I'm really coming around on as of late. And I do think it's probably more likely just going to be a one-off, but I think 2 is to be safe. And then up to 4 Mystery Garden. Now, again, I'm not playing that high account in any of my Gardevoir builds just now, but the effect of this card is just so powerful. Discarding energy in hand and then drawing for the amount of Psychic Pokemon you have in play. There's even Wombo combo decks that use like a very thick line of Dusknoir and things like Munkidori and Mew and Latias and those sorts of things where you can still manufacture a huge amount of card draw from the stadium. Again, I'm thinking like future style boxes that use quad Iron Crown in addition to Mew EX. Again, they can look towards Latias. Like, there's so many good basic Psychic Mons with like the combination of Munkidori, Lati, Mew, these sorts of things, that it's really not much work to then make the Garden a really good option to be some on-board hand disruption protection. So I think this has a lot of promise, not just within Gardevoir, although obviously that's the main reason why it's on here. It's going to be an instant 1/2 of, I think, in Gardevoir alongside Secret Box builds. But I also think it has applications beyond that, just by being a potential to burst draw your way out of situations against hand disruption if you're playing like an aggro Iron Hands Crown deck, something like that. Maybe even Valiant Shenanigans. You know, we've seen this sort of stuff before, but the fact that this is a stadium version that can then go on top of Mew EX and Fez draw, I think you're finding yourself out of hand disruption like quite frequently with this combination of cards. Then towards the bottom left, we have a huge chunk of fighting support coming out in this expansion, starting off with the Mega Lucario EX. This card is just like giga overstated. Yes, it has that Psychic weakness that might be holding it back, possibly why it's going to be more of a tier 2 contender that has to pick its battles and either tech for the Gardevoir matchup with certain deck building, or accept that Gardevoir is a really tough matchup. But we know that Aura Jab is just very efficient energy acceleration for 1 attachment, and Mega Brave for 2 energy is 270 that can then be buffed by Premium Power Pro, which I'm saying you should get 4 copies of because it's fantastic damage mod for fighting Pokemon. It's great for Lucario, it's great for Hariyama as well that's on here, it's great for Cynthia's Garchomp if you want to experiment with that archetype, and again, this is just throughout its lifespan in the game, it's going to make every fighting Pokemon just much more devastating as an option. So yeah, a 4-3 line of the Mega Lucario, although I also recommend grabbing some 70 hit point Riolu from previous sets. The fact that this has 80 hit points can sometimes come into lists if you're going artisan based, so that you're a bit safer against Hawlucha. So maybe a mix and match of 80 and 70 hit point Riolu is going to be the best policy for now, especially because we also have the new Fighting Gong, which can search for basic fighting Pokemon or basic fighting energy. Again, very good for Garchomp, Lucario as an archetype. Could be very useful for anything trying to weave in a small Lunatone Solrock draw engine package. So I also think that's very decent to pick up a huge chunk of these, and again, just has so much synergy for future sets as they get printed. Lunatone Solrock, fantastic new draw engine that's all basic. You require each of them to be in play for the Lunar Cycle ability to allow you to discard fighting energy and draw 3. And then the Solrock can attack for 70 and also hits through weakness and resistance. So it can knock out cleanly even things like Rolts very early on in the game. So Solrock's a great early game pressure poker, whilst the Lunatone is a great draw option, giving basically every fighting deck like a good way to tee off games and begin a prize race whilst only representing single prize threats, similar to how we've seen Fan Rotom be a really good engine and early game attacker. these two Pokemon combine to try and solve that situation as well for not necessarily just fighting decks. Anything that can afford to play like 4 Gong, 4 basic fighting, and like a 3-2 line of Lunatone, that might end up being a new package in its own right with Night Stretchers and whatnot that just becomes good enough to give decks that don't necessarily have an early game, now an early game is imported and you get a bit more draw on top of that. So I think it really will be a way to insert, you know, probably like 12 or so slots into your deck to make that all come together, but it completely flips the deck build and sort of gives you early game pressure, which is really cool. And then Hariyama, very solid stage 1 Pokemon, most likely going alongside the Mega Lucario, as we already have this ability in format from Hop's Dubwool, but this is a fighting type and has an attack that deals to 10, which is already a solid number for dealing with some basic EX Pokemon, but it also gains Premium Power Pro, right? So the Hariyama can now be beating into basic EX Pokemon, and I think a big reason why the Mega Lucario deck is seeing success in Japan right now is despite your Lucario being a 3-prize Pokemon that can be up-traded into by basic EXs, the fact that Aurajab is powering up potentially multiple Hariyama means then that you can crack back with a combination of Wild Press and Wild Press to catch back up in a prize race. Because the Lucario deck is foregoing 2 prizes on its own end altogether, it's just going for 3 prizes, then single prize Pokemon, so you can still work your way into a favourable prize trade with Hariyama as an option that can knock out basic EXs quite cleanly. Jumping up to the top right then with some basic Pokemon, Mega Kangaskhan EX has that really helpful ability that can see it come into all sorts of archetypes simply because it's a draw 2 when it's in the active. We already have Latias in format. Very easy to pivot around this Pokemon. There's all sorts of archetypes that can't KO this Pokemon, so it can just sit on the board and always be, similar to like a Mew or a Fez, a means towards getting more cards. Really useful for potential Raging Bolt lists. There could even be lists that forego Owls altogether and go all basic, including this Pokemon. There's potential builds of Terapagos Noctowl, where we try and get tanky with the Mega Kang as well, weaving in Bravery Charms, Bouffalance, that sort of thing. That can make this a really tough nut to crack. The Rapid Fire combo attack isn't like spectacular, but it's definitely serviceable, and there are high roll situations if you can flip a couple heads. And because its energy attack cost is all colourless, you can also weave in things like Monkey Dory very easily in the list to augment that damage anyway. So I think Mega Kang definitely has a lot of purpose and a lot of longevity just for being a very solid ability in the game. Mega Mawile EX has a really nice late game attacking option in that Greedily Devour. As of right now, I think its main purpose will be a one-off within Archaladon EX decks. Now, Archaladon hasn't been that popular for a little while, but we know it has the pedigree behind it. It has been within the format before as a top-tier threat. And ultimately, giving this some substantial late game where it has one-hit KO potential could be worthwhile, and potentially bringing it back on the map. The biggest must-have tech card is actually Psyduck, and this is a promotional card, so not actually from this set. This Psyduck's Damp ability denies the opponent's use of self-KO abilities, the likes of Magneton and, of course, Dusknoir, Dusclops being the predominant ones here. This instantly gives somewhat of a check to Draga Dusknoir. If you can time this card correctly, you can shut down some really powerful lines of attack from them. So I think this is a vital pickup. Finally, in the bottom right then, we have the Mega Venusaur stuff. I do think the combination of Bind Down from Bulbasaur with Relicanth is very powerful, and Mega Venusaur is huge. It has 380 hit points. That Solar Trans is such a useful ability. It can allow you to have these Shuckle in the deck that can provide additional healing. Jungle Dump also heals and deals a respectable 240 damage. We've mostly been trying out the archetype with Crustle, and Crustle's already like on the fringes of being a strong deck, giving Crustle more potential healing and more avenues to win via Bind Down Trap. I think ultimately make Venusaur a potential tier 2 deck. Vitality Forest as well, I'm saying pick up 4. Right now it's only really that useful with Venusaur and potentially Meganium, but I think this just has bags of potential, allowing us to evolve up our grass Pokemon instantly as long as it's not our first turn. And then a final nod to Magnemite and Magnezone. The new Magnemite has 70 hit points, which makes it better than any other option we currently have, because you can stay out of range of a couple Monkey Dory ticks, or we can stay out of range of a Phantom Dive. And then if you are planning to play a Magneton build of, say, Iron Hands or Zekrom or something along those lines, you could consider the new Magnezone as well. This card looks really uninspiring, except for the fact that it can give these lightning-style decks a really nice Crustle answer. Upper Spark, as soon as it comes into play, allows you to deal 170 damage, and then for 2 energy, Flashing Bolt also deals 160. So this one Magnezone can get a lot of value in the Crustle matchup, piling on the pressure, and right now the Lightning decks don't really have an answer, so the fact that Magneton's already good in the deck means just this one Magnezone include could catch some opponents by surprise. Onto the Believer Buylist then. These are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential. Now, Lieutenant Searcher's Deal is a really unique effect, so I always want to just be safe rather than sorry and pick up a couple copies of this card. I personally think it's terrible and won't ever see the light of day, but it's so different to other supporters that we've seen, so unintuitive. There could randomly pop up be a deck where your opponent can't afford to let you take the prize card or give up a prize card themselves, so you end up getting a solid draw 4. I don't know, there's going to be some weird checkmatey thing in the future where this card could have like no downside essentially, and that's where the card starts to feel more appealing. We also have the Surfing Beach Stadium. I think Water is in like a identity crisis right now. We're still waiting for more support cards, but this is definitely a solid card to come out to improve the pivoting options within Water. Iron Defender's a solid enough trainer, and we know that there's a good amount of metal decks in the format right now, with Golden Go being on the forefront, also the likes of Archaladon possibly picking up some new toys. I think right now that doesn't ever really make the space into Golden Go decks, especially when there's already an Arven approach and you could just grab Rigid Band, and that's not really seeing much play right now. So I'm picking stuff up really with the acknowledgement that metal is solid, so you may end up shoving these into the deck at some point. Then we have the Suspicious Watch. This can allow you to devolve your Psychic Pokemon, which is looking pretty appealing, especially when we have this interesting draw engine from Alakazam and Kadabra, actually. When they come into play, you can draw 2 from Kadabra and draw 3 from Alakazam. There actually have been some results in Japan already for a build of Alakazam, oftentimes alongside Tinkaton, where both Alakazam and Tinkaton's attacks do better the more cards you have in hand. And of course, there's a Tinkaton that can draw 3 on its own ability as well. So there is some synergy going on here, a bit of a rogue archetype, but generally card draw from abilities like these have seen play in the past, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more from it. Speaking of which, jumping back to the top left, we have the new Tinkaton line. There's actually a really solid Tinker Tough, which when you evolve up, you can flip a coin if heads, remove an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Hammers haven't seen a lot of play as of late, but it does synergize with the new Tinkaton that has the large swing attack for 1 metal, dealing 240, minus 60 for each energy attached to your opponent's active. So in theory, you can try using Hammers and Tinker Tough to remove energy from your opponent, then hit a really decent amount with your Tinkaton. Additionally, this card is excellent with boss's orders, right? Anytime you can take out your opponent's Latties, Fez, Mew EX, there's just so many options for this Tinkaton to take easy boss KOs. And let's not forget that we have Genesect EX, so you can search out this evolution line very, very easily. Alternatively, the Tinker Tough could simply go in that sort of new Tinkaton deck that uses the EX and uses the other fairy one as a draw engine. Maybe alongside Alakazam, maybe on its own. Definitely a fun rogue. Kind of reminds me of like an Ethan's Typhlosion thing, where it's a really overstatted single prize Pokemon that is probably a bit too much work to get going and not always reliable, but does have good damage output, and Crushing Hammer's also a solid effect, so you can't really write it off. As for a couple basic megas, we have Mega Latias EX. It can deal a solid 300 damage, and the Latios really helps out here, accelerating to this mega, especially alongside Ethan's Ho-Oh EX. I think the main downside of Mega Latias is that Dragon's already a type that the format is opting to target, thanks to Raging Bolt and Dragapult being so popular. So it's a very vulnerable 280 hit point Pokemon. Also, we already have Pikachu EX that can deal 300 and has inbuilt protection with its own ability. So in many ways, the 2 prize is tankier than this 3 prizer. Mega Absol EX is mostly interesting thanks to its Doom Period attack, where you can knock out a Pokemon if it has 6 counters on it. We have all sorts of manipulation for damage counters, from abilities to item cards and the new stadium card and whatnot. There's so many ways we can try and manipulate a situation to put 6 counters on your opponent's active to then take knockouts cleanly. But again, you're a vulnerable 280 hit point 3 prizer, weak to grass, which is also targeted in the format, thanks to Charizard, thanks to Grimmsnarl, thanks to Enzoroark. Naturally, just because Teal Mask is a really good card in the game, like, Mega Absol is very flimsy, and I don't really expect to build a deck around it, but could it show up in like a Grimmsnarl deck, for example, with the E-Switch already in there? Possibly. Could it show up in a Toolbox deck simply for being a solid Dark type that can take advantage of Prism? Like, maybe this is better than Monkey Dory in the Ho-Oh Armor Rouge, for example. I think there are some reasons to pick up this card. And if you're going whole hog with Absol, you could think about the new Spiritomb as well, placing more counters on your opponent's attacking Pokemon after they hit into your guys. The Meganium's an interesting evolution line, doubling up grass energy attachments on your board. Like, sure, it has synergy with Hydrapple or just a Teal Mask Ogopon deck in general. Maybe it could go into a Toedscruel deck for really boosting your damage output. Like, yes, there's synergies here, but it's a clunky stage 2 that I don't think gives quite enough value for us, especially in a format that targets these evolving Pokemon so heavily. I don't know, I'm a bit down on Meganium compared to a few other people, but I haven't seen enough results from it to really think it's going to be exceptional. And then Gumshoes is a Pokemon that I also don't expect to see too much play, but it does have that same ability as Oranguru. Guru saw a huge amount of play, so you kind of have to accept that Gumshoes could be worth the additional space in the deck to make it happen. Then we end on 3 Stage 1 Mega Pokemon. First of all, Mega Absol EX. This is definitely one for the fun. Discarding the top 6 of your deck and then doing 100 for each water energy you discard in that way. Yeah, this is going to be one of those like classic theme deck style builds where you have a huge number of water energy in the deck to try and capitalize on your Avalanche Hammer. Never going to be consistent enough to be high tier, but could create some highlight reel moments. Mega Camerupt EX is actually quite an efficient Pokemon where for just 1 energy attachment you can be dealing 240 damage if your opponent's burned, so that's actually 260 damage, and we could even push that further with some abilities. There's also that second attack that can deal a solid 280. It is for 4 energy, but we do already have Ignition energy in the format, and our initial build of Camerupt really does lean into that Hilda engine using a lot of different special energy, so I don't think it's much to ask to have Ignition in there. You also have Reversal energy that can unlock your basic Camerupt as a stage 1 beta when you're behind on prize cards. I really want to toy around with the Camerupt myself, actually. I think there's a lot to like here, especially when water's not a really prevalent type in the game. This is actually one of the tankier megas we end up having. And then finally, that Mega Manectric EX. It can deal a pretty tasty 330 if you discard all energy from it. And we know that Lightning has a ton of acceleration support, right, from the likes of Magneton, as well as Electric Generator. There's even things like Heavy Baton on Iron Hands. There's a lot of ways to power this guy up. It also has the Flash Ray attack for 2 Lightning, dealing 120, and prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basics. And as we know, there are often some basic focus decks in the game. If you combine the Mega Manectric with Magneton, there are simply going to be those situations where you can instantly go into a just Manectric board state, announcing Flash Ray, and then your opponent can't do any random like Boss Prime shenanigans to get around you, and you simply just win on the spot. For my money, Mega Manectric just sort of dilutes what is already like quite an inconsistent build of Lightning right now, where you really want to just capitalize on the amount of basic energy you have to give yourself maximum generator odds. But again, this is always one to keep an eye on for the future. 330 is a solid enough number to be hitting. Flash Ray could be a bigger impact in other formats, so still one to keep an eye on and could be worth experimenting with. I've tried a build with Magneton trying to be almost Checkmate style. I've also tried it being just a mini package within an Iron Hands Miraidon build. Both have felt okay, but not outstanding. So that's it. That's the buy list. If you're a pessimist and don't care about any of the brand new archetypes, just pick up those 4 Lily and you're going to be fine. Otherwise, there are some cool things. I'm really excited with Mega Lucario. I'm still trying out all sorts of builds with that. I'm low-key a believer in Camerupt. That's going to be one of my fun decks to experiment with. And I'm going to be trying the Lunar Rock engine in basically anything I can. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.